you recognize that theme song, it is from a show called The Good Place. It was a show on NBC. The series has concluded, but it's streaming now. And if you've watched it, you would know that it is based on a premise that people lived a life on Earth and then they were judged and they went to one place or another. And a group of characters ended up in this one location. They woke up and they were greeted by a message that said, "Welcome to the good place." And so, an interesting thing is that one of the characters in that show was a philosophy professor, and part of the show was he would instruct the other members in what it means to be good by the various methods of various philosophers and ethical theories that we're going to cover in this class. So perhaps we'll take a look at a few of the clips throughout the class. They're kind of fun. So I just thought that would be a good way to start. I would just say, welcome to Intro to Ethical Conflicts. You will be fine. So what are we going to do in this first chapter, chapter 1? Let's take a look at some of the learning objectives. Number 1, we're going to define philosophy and explain its relationship with ethics. We're going to recognize the difference between ethics and morality based on the definitions of important key terms related to them. We hear the terms ethics and morality all the time. Are they interchangeable? Are they not? We'll get into that. Explain the various approaches to the study of morality. How do we go about it? Do we get out a fork and knife? Do we start from the top, go down? Do we start from the bottom, go up? Do we go around? What are the approaches to the study of morality? We're going to interpret the meaning of morality by differentiating it with the concepts of aesthetics, non-moral behavior, and manners. We say lots of things are good, but does that mean that they are all moral? We'll take a look. Describe how morality applies to human beings based on its 4 important aspects. We will scrutinize the various theories that attempt to account for the origination of morality. Where do we get morality? Where does it come from? We're going to distinguish between morality and the law by examining some real-life examples. We're going to distinguish between morality and religion, and we're going to probe the arguments on why human beings should be moral. So this is chapter 1. So we have some pretty big things to start with right off the bat. Ethics, a general introduction. So in life, there are certain things that we must do and certain things we must not do. We've been told since we were very young, infants really, do this, don't do this. So there is an ethical dimension of human existence. Humans experience life in a world of good and evil every day. We understand that certain kinds of actions in terms of right and wrong, the very structure of human existence dictates that we must make choices. Shall we do this? Shall we do that? Perhaps you've heard the who took the cookie from the cookie jar. We are faced very young at an early age with choices. Ethics helps us use our freedom responsibly and understand who we are. Do we consider ourselves good people? Do we consider ourselves bad people? Do we make good choices? Do we show responsibility? Ethics gives direction in our struggle to answer the fundamental questions that ask how we should live our lives and how we can make right choices. So at the heart of the study of ethics, it's determining how we can make right decisions versus wrong decisions. What makes it a right decision? What makes it a wrong decision? How do we measure it? Who decides? Those are all questions that we will look at. So our first objective was to relate the 3 areas of philosophy to ethics. So let's take a look at philosophy and its branches, and I'm going to expand it a little bit. So philosophy literally means the love of wisdom. It's from the Greek words philia, meaning love or friendship, and Sophia, meaning wisdom. So love of wisdom. So we have a few areas of study that would often found under the study of philosophy. And so if you were to study more courses in philosophy, you would have courses in all of these areas. So we have logic, the study of arguments. It's the study of correct reasoning. Then we have metaphysics, which is the study of the most general aspects of reality pertaining to subjects such as substance, identity, the nature of the mind, and free will. It's the study of nature, the nature of reality, the nature of the world in which humans live. Then we have epistemology, the branch of philosophy that deals with nature, origin, scope, possibility / study of knowledge. Then we have ethics, and that's our general term. It's often described as the science or study of morality. It looks at ethical behavior that we determine is good or right. The Western tradition of ethics is sometimes called moral philosophy. So sometimes textbooks will say they're called moral philosophy as opposed to ethics. So it's the study of right and wrong in human endeavors. And then we have aesthetics. And this branch of philosophy explores the creation and appreciation of beauty through critical analysis and reflection. And what's interesting is we're seeing more and more of this creativity aspects of research and study coming into academia. Okay, taking a closer look at these three branches of philosophy that your textbook discusses. So metaphysics is the study of the nature of reality, and it asks the following questions. What is the nature of reality and of the things that exist? Specifically, such questions as the following are asked. Is there really cause and effect? And if so, how does it work? What is the nature of the physical world, and is there anything other than the physical, such as the mental or spiritual? What is the nature of human beings? Is there freedom in reality, or is everything predetermined? I'm going to go back to that next to last one. What is the nature of human beings? So we're going to take a look at that issue a bit in this course. Then we're going to go to epistemology, which deals with these questions. What is knowledge? What are truth and falsity? And what do they apply? What is required for someone to actually know something? What is the nature of perception? And how reliable is it? What's the difference between knowledge and belief? And is there anything such as certain knowledge? And so we'll touch a little bit on that. But primarily, we're going to be focused on ethics, which deals with what is right or wrong in human behavior and conduct. So it asks questions like this. What constitutes any person or action being good, bad, right or wrong, and how do we know this? So a little epistemological in there. How do we know? What part does self-interest or the interest of others play in the making of moral decisions and judgments? What theories of conduct are valid or invalid, and why? Should we use principles or rules or laws as the basis for our choices, or should we let each situation decide our morality? And are killing, lying, cheating, stealing, and other things, are they ever right? Are they always wrong? Those are the things that we will take a look at. So let's start out with a definition for ethics. Ethics are a system of moral principles and a branch of philosophy which defines what is good for individuals and society. At its simplest, it's a system of moral principles. They affect how people make decisions and lead their lives. It's concerned with what is good for individuals and society and is also prescribed as moral philosophy. And it is derived from the Greek word ethos, which can mean custom, habit, character, or disposition. The study of ethics covers the following dilemmas. How do we live a good life? What are our rights and responsibilities? What is the language of right and wrong? And moral decisions. What is good and bad? The objective of this first chapter is to introduce the core terms and ideas of morality. I think of this first chapter as a glossary of terms that you're going to run into. Sometimes I think about it as a kitchen sink, or sometimes I think about it as a laundry list of terms, because there are just so many terms in this first chapter. So I put together a chart, and I'm sure you can't read it too well here, but what I did was decide to map out all of the terms. And notice that there's not really a hierarchy here, that there are a bunch of concepts that the connection they have to one another is essentially, and that they are offshoots of ethics. But I will go through this one section at a time. So this is the way that I visualize the chapter, and I hope it's helpful for you to see it this way too. So let's get into a bit of the semantics of the terms that we use, or actually the lack of terms that we have. Because in the English language, we don't have enough words. For example, let's take the word love. There's so many things we love. We love our pets. We love that taco that we had for dinner. We love our favorite sports teams. We love our mother. We love our significant other. And we use that word for everything. And so we have the same issue with ethics, because one of the things that we define ethics is we talk about good and bad. And yet we say everything is good or everything is bad. We have so many categories for what falls under good and bad. So it's kind of like our example of love. So let's take a look at the types of good. And so one of the things to take a look at with what we consider good and bad, well, let me back up and say, generally when we talk about good, it's a term that is called hedonism. And it's a term that we like to move away from painful things and move toward pleasure things. So we'll often see the word pleasure associated with good, because we want something, we want to feel good. It's like a basic way that we are wired. And so so that leads us to, sometimes we will undergo some short-term bad for some long-term good. Case in point, you're in this class. There are so many other things that you could be doing with your time, but yet you're in this class. Because in the long run, you can have a better job, or it'll get you to your degree. You'll get your credits in this area of the core curriculum that you need. And so you will suffer some short-term discomfort for a long-term good. And so it's not that we avoid unpleasant things all the time. We will subject ourselves to it if in the long run it's going to be great. And so people who train for different activities, sports, etc., that it can be very grueling, but they're looking for the payoff. So as we go into types of good, as I mentioned, one type is the issue of pleasure, that we want to move towards something that feels good. Also, we want to sometimes consider excellence as a form of good. Whatever is good will probably involve some degree of excellence. We can also look back to the people who are in training for a marathon or something like that, or somebody who wants to be the top in their field. And so we look at excellence under the term of good as well. A couple other terms that we use when we talk about good is under creativity. We consider that things that are creative to be on the good side, but also things that have harmony would be considered something that's bad. We especially like harmony when it leads to peaceful situations. So if we have two warring nations against each other, it is a very good thing to create some level of harmony and lasting peace. So we see that as a good. While we are on this topic of what is good, I want to skip ahead a few pages in the textbook where it talks about good, bad, right, wrong, used in a non-moral sense. And this again goes back to the concept that we just throw this word around all the time. And so we use the same words when we use them in a moral sense as we do in a non-moral sense. And so we can say, oh, we have a good dog. And does that mean it's a moral dog? Well, we don't apply morality to animals. I mean, we could be debated, that could be debatable. However, we do apply morality to the owners of animals. And if you want to know what I mean, just watch a few episodes of Judge Judy when somebody is suing somebody over what somebody's pet has done, and we don't hold the pets responsible. We do hold their owners. So it applies to, we use the word good in inanimate objects, and we also talk about that we had a good nap. That doesn't mean it's a moral nap. Or we had really good food. Doesn't mean it's moral food. And then we also use good. Sometimes we can confuse manners and etiquette with morality, and that's like doing the right thing in the right situation because it's good manners or good etiquette. But that is a social construct, and not doing it doesn't necessarily harm anyone. So if you were invited to a fancy dinner and you did not use the correct spoon in the correct order, or you didn't put your pinky out, or whatever it is, that's an etiquette issue, and that is not a moral issue. And so I went ahead, for the sake of our chart, is to put all of these uses of good together, but they do show up in a couple spots in the first few pages of your textbook. Of course, it is important to address all of the words that have the word moral in it, because they don't all mean the same thing, nor are they necessarily opposites. So for this chapter, in chapter 1, it talks about some terms, and it's important to be able to differentiate between the terms. And so we have moral, amoral, and non-moral. And I went ahead and put immoral under moral, because those are the opposites. We have someone who is moral versus immoral. They're good versus bad. But these other two terms are in their own category. And I'm going to cover non-moral first. Non-moral is another example of when we use terms of like good, but not in a moral way. And so we could have a good dog or a good breakfast. So we also, it often refers to objects. And so you may have heard the expression, guns don't kill people, people kill people. And so people might associate guns or other weapons as a immoral object, but objects are non-moral. They don't exist in the realm of morality, good versus bad, right versus wrong. And so, and we also make a lot of decisions that fall in a non-moral category. So not everything we do is an ethical issue or moral issue. So when we get up in the morning and we decide what to wear, generally speaking, there probably could be some exceptions, but generally speaking, that's a non-moral issue. What we decide to have for breakfast, where we decide to go, which route we want to take. Along the way, obviously, some ethical issues could arise, but a lot of our behavior can exist in a non-moral realm. And so, and also we tend to think of animals, we consider those non-moral. So yes, animals can have action, and if you've ever seen any episodes of the Judge Judy show, you know that issues with pets and what they do, dogs that get out, bite the neighbors, etc., take up a lot of time in courts, particularly on the Judge Judy show. And but the animal is not held responsible, but the people can be held responsible. So it's a moral issue for the people. But pets, like objects, generally in the non-moral domain. So then we have amoral, and fortunately, it's pretty rare that somebody is amoral. But to someone who's amoral, they're indifferent to right and wrong. They just don't seem to have any moral sense, and they don't care to learn it. And these are the people who do tend to be like the psychopaths, sociopaths. There are even people who have had frontal lobotomies that tend to, they seem to have lost their sensitivity to right and wrong because of that. So your textbook goes through and talks about a few people that have received notoriety for killings and rapes, and that they have been examined, and they seem to fit this either psychopath or sociopath category, and they just have they just lack judgment. They could be impulsive. There's a quote from your text that describes amoral. No sense of conscience, guilt, or remorse is present. Harmful acts are committed without discomfort or shame. So amorality then is basically an attitude that some, luckily, only a few human beings possess. So I'm glad it's not very common. Now, just because someone's amoral, they don't have a sense of right and wrong, doesn't mean that they are not punished. In fact, it's important for them to receive punishment for their actions because they'll do it again because they don't care. And so the rest of society needs to be protected from those criminals. And so it's important to be able to distinguish moral, amoral, and non-moral because sometimes we tend to apply a moral versus immoral standard, one or the other, and it may fall in a category of non-moral. It means it doesn't even register on the moral spectrum. Or amoral, we could judge it, but it's also in a different category, and like I said, thankfully rare. Okay, another objective that we have is to differentiate between the scientific and descriptive approach to morality. So these two general approaches, scientific / descriptive, or normative / prescriptive. I prefer to use the terms descriptive and prescriptive because I think the terms suggest what they mean. And so if we were going to take a scientific approach, a descriptive approach to study ethics, what that approach would be is it's just observation, data collecting. It's what you see in the social sciences. They examine human behavior. And then after they examine it and look for trends, look for something that they see frequently, they will put together a description of what that behavior looks like. And so they will, they will say something like, humans are this, or humans do this. They don't tell us what to do, they just are telling us what they have observed. And so one theory that falls under this is called psychological egoism, and we'll get to this in the next chapter. But what that theory states, is that humans, when left to their own devices, they act in their own self-interest. And so it's not telling us to act in our own self-interest. There are theories that do that. But psychological egoism says, I just see him, I just call him as I see him. Humans act in their own self-interest. And so that is scientific or descriptive. It describes how humans act. And then the next one is prescriptive. And so I always try to think of this as, take 2 of these and call me in the morning, a prescription. So I think of a doctor prescribing something. It's telling us what to do. And so you're going to, in this category, you're going to hear the shoulds or the oughts, and or the things we shouldn't do. So these are our rules. Chapter 1 has a list of the 10 commandments, so those would be prescriptive things that tell us the way to live by. And there are reasons why, depending on which system of ethics that we're following, there are reasons why they're there. But they are telling us you are to do this and you are not to do that. And I'm going to add on this area of meta-ethics, kind of a tag onto the normative prescriptive. We could put it in the middle, I suppose. But meta-ethicists are more interested in the language of ethics. So they're more interested in what does it mean when we use the word good. They want to analyze the rational foundations of any particular ethical system. And so I put it over here because it does look at the prescriptive approaches. So whether that be when we get to the theories utilitarianism or prima facie duties, it's going to look at these systems and then analyze how solid they are. Are they consistent? Are there exceptions? Do they break down? And so that's where I put it there. But metaethics in and of itself does not tell us how to behave. Instead, it wants us to be able to think about, what does it mean to say that we should do a certain thing, and who does it apply to? And we find a rise in interest in metaethics because, we do live in a global environment. It's a pluralistic society. And so what we find is any one particular ethical system doesn't always fit all people. One size does not fit all. And so we see a rise in metaethics to kind of examine the foundations of the various ethical viewpoints, the ethical rules. And so philosophers feel that they might do well to follow what other specialists have done is start looking at the language and logic and the foundations of a system rather than just attempt to arrive at an ethical system. So, but the bottom line is we want to help human beings live together and live together in a more meaningful and ethical way. If you were to ask someone where their morality comes from, you're probably going to get a lot of different answers. But generally speaking, they're going to fall into these 4 categories. And so let's begin with religious morality. And that even the foundations of the early ethical theories, they gave space for knowing what was right and wrong came from a higher source. And it wasn't necessarily the Judeo-Christian or some of the other religions that we have today. But there was an observation that it came from a creator type being, or maybe beings. There could be many. And so so we just have a very long history of looking to religion as a source for right and wrong. But not everyone is going to give that explanation or source for their own morality right off the bat. I see these pretty evenly distributed when I ask students where their morality comes from. And so another one is nature. This one was probably a little bit less than the others, in that it's just part of the makeup of our world. It's just part of the furniture of kind of as the world turns, that we have this innate sense of right and wrong, but not just us individually, but everyone can pick up on that because it's just part of the world we live in. And so it kind of accounts for some of what we might get in a religious source, but without the necessity of having there being a supreme being. It's just part of our world. And then some would say that their morality comes just from themselves, their inner sense of right and wrong, that they have their own personal moral code. And it can be very strong. It can be that gut feeling. It can be intuition. But their own sense of right and wrong is very strong and clear to them, and that's where their morality comes from. And then finally we have society, and I think that we get in line with certain expectations in society pretty readily, maybe too readily at times. And so I think that we all look to the people around us and see what are the best ways to act, and that includes morality. Another way of asking these questions: where does morality come from? Has it always been part of the world? Does it originate from some supernatural being? Is it embedded within nature itself? Is it strictly a product of the minds of human beings? Going along with the topic of where does morality come from, we find ourselves asking, is morality subjective or is it objective? and those categories that we just talked about, religion, society, etc., we can think about whether any of those are subjective or objective. And so a way to think about some things that are subjective versus objective is to take a look at these people here. They are, the first one looks like they're having a piece of cake and somebody thinks it's great. It's a wonderful taste of cake, and the other one thinks it's horrible. So that's subjective. And so there's so many things, there's so many differences of opinion. When we have difference of opinion, that is a clue. It's not always, but it is a clue that it might be a subjective issue. As opposed to this, the one next to it where there are 4 oranges. And so they're both observing that there are 4 oranges. That's an objective truth. Now, we do live in what we call a post-truth society. Never thought I saw that coming. But there could be people who are going to try to poke holes into things that we knew as objective truth, and that will be important to take a look at. What are they saying and how strong is their argument. But for the sake of this conversation, we're going to say there was agreement among these two people that there were 4 oranges. So in the realm of objective morality, if we're going to assume that there is an objective morality, there's a gold standard out there that tells us what is right and what is wrong, where's that going to come from? And so, one, it could come from a supernatural being. They're all knowing, all wise, all good. They would know it was good. Or it just could be the fabric of nature. It's just embedded. Or it's part of the furniture of the world, independent of human beings. It's not that good exists outside of what we think is good, is its point. Okay, so when I start thinking about this argument and this point, the example of tree falling in a forest always is the example that's brought up. And then, of course, when I start thinking that, I've got the song from Dear Evan Hansen going through my head about a tree falling in the forest and does it make a sound. So here's a little cartoon. I asked around and nobody heard a thing as a tree falls down. So values is totally subjective. Some argue that morality stems strictly from within human beings. Things can have values and be classed as good, bad, right, or wrong, if and only if there is some conscious being who can put value on these things. If there are no human beings, then there can be no values. To make this point, I'm going to give this example. I'm going to give the example of beauty. If we decided to put values, right and wrong, in the category like we would put beauty, something that is, attractive, a lot of, they say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So that's an opinion. And so something doesn't become beautiful, isn't considered beautiful until we say it is. And then we kind of identify it and label it. And so people who are look at values as subjective think we, human beings, conscious beings, have put labels on this and that and labeled some things good and some things bad. We could have done it a different way. It's subjective and reliant on human beings. So at this point, I want to bring up the term that you're going to hear throughout the course, a synthesis. And the authors of your text think that both of these points, and there are going to be some others, examples as well as we go, they think, well, those are both good points. And so a synthesis is the combination of ideas to form a theory or system. So a major aim of this course is to present a reasonable synthesis of ethical views. So in this example, we could state that we view values potentially as objective, but know that there can be some subjectivity to it. So we're not going to throw out one or the other. So in this synthesis, values is both subjective and objective. The synthesis would be like this. It would seem that at least some values reside outside of human beings, even though perhaps many more are dependent on conscious human beings who are able to value things. Values are more complex than either the subjective or the objective position can describe, and that a better position to take is that values are both objective and subjective. So here's a bit more on the synthesis. A third variable should be added so that there is an interaction of three variables as follows. The thing of value, or the thing being valued, a conscious being who values, or the valuer, and then the context of the situation in which the valuing takes place. So, for example, we can say that gold exists outside of what we think of it, but what makes it so precious, and we even get the term gold standard, is because there's conscious beings who value it. And the context is that it ends up being kind of a monetary marker for how strong economies are. And so that would be the context of the situation. And so Thoreau proposes in a synthesis that with values and morals, it's a combination of all three of these variables. Okay, we've discussed objective and subjective. Is it part of our world, or do we call certain things? But where does our morality come from? Like, why do we have it? So as human beings begin to interact, they found that they could accomplish so much more if they were bonded together and cooperated, rather than being isolated. And so survival is a big part of this, survival and safety. So they decided upon good and bad that would help them live together more successfully and more meaningfully. I don't know about you, but when I go out of my house in the morning, I want to be able to count on the fact that my neighbors aren't going to beat me up and steal my stuff. And so as we come together, there is this trust, we bond together, and we identify certain behaviors as good and certain behaviors as bad. So these beliefs need sanctions, which are provided by leaders. So morality was tied by these leaders not only to their authority, so we recognize we come together, we need rules to live by, and we need leaders to help us enforce the rules, but also those leaders also often looked to a higher authority that kind of commissioned them and gave them their authority, whether it be a supernatural being or whether it be nature. But our leaders that enforce our kind of societal morality, they also look to a higher power. I want to share with you from the text the information from where do values come from. And we're going to look at custom and tradition. Okay, so quoting from Thoreau and Crassaman, many customs and traditions are quite effective and helpful in creating moral societies. Moral teachings have arisen out of human need and social interaction and have become customs and traditions in a particular society. For example, in order to live life together creatively and in peace, one of the first moral teachings or rules has to be about taking human life, because obviously if life is constantly in danger, then it is very difficult for people to live and work together, which, by the way, is my point of going outside and having that trust in your neighbor that they subscribe to a particular custom or tradition of morality. And he continues, however, in order for customs and traditions to be effective and continuously applicable to a member of society, they must be critically analyzed and tested and evaluated. And this is where reflective morality comes in. Philosophers in general demand of themselves and others that every human belief, proposition, or idea be carefully and critically examined to ensure that it has its basis in truth. Morality is no different from any other area of philosophic study in this respect. Philosophers do not suggest that custom and tradition be eliminated or thrown out, but they do urge human beings to use reason to examine the basis and effectiveness of all moral teachings or rules, no matter how traditional or accepted they are. In other words, philosophy requires human beings to reflect on their moral customs and traditions to determine whether they should be retained or eliminated. So, we give a quote from Socrates, and you've probably heard this: the unexamined life is not worth living. So, in the study of morality, we could say the unexamined custom or tradition is not worth living by. So whatever your moral and traditions are that tell you how and why to be moral, it is important to look at the underpinnings and see how solid, reliable, and is it giving you the outcome of the life that you should lead. So, and then continuing, therefore, just as people should not accept statements or propositions for which there is no proof or significant logical argument, so they should not accept moral customs or traditions without first testing them, again, proof, reason, and their experience. And so the authors give the example of the Ten Commandments and say that lots of people don't realize that the first three are actually about a human's relationship to God. So if you are not a follower of the Judeo-Christian God, those first three do not apply to you. In fact, and it goes on to state that people who, and I can attest this in my years of teaching this class, that when it comes to the question of right and wrong, people often point to or even talking about Christianity, point to the Ten Commandments, and yet the Ten Commandments it's not exactly, it's not even close. It's not the point of Christianity. The point of Christianity is not the Ten Commandments. So he points out that a lot of people don't know that some of them don't apply to everyone, or have examined the underpinnings of the Ten Commandments. Now, of course, we're not going to throw them all out, because we see the rules, about, don't talk falsely against others, don't steal, don't kill. We see that in many moral systems. So the point is, let's examine it and see if, if it holds up, if those are things we want to live by. So it's important then, I'm going to continue here with their quotes. It is important then that all customs, traditions, systems of rules, ethical theories should be carefully analyzed and critically evaluated before we continue to accept or live by them. Again, we should not reject them out of hand, but neither should we endorse them wholeheartedly unless we have subjected them to careful, logical scrutiny. And so that is going to be what we're going to do in the rest of the book. Is we are going to take a look at various moral theories, ethical theories, and we get to kick the tires, take them for a drive, and see if they hold up. Now, depending on which edition of the text that you have, the latest one, which has the two roads on it diverging, I noticed that it did not have a reference to the lottery by Shirley Jackson, and I'm not sure why, because it's been in there a long time and I think it's important. But you may have already read the lottery. I'll put a link in the notes to this video. We're going to circle back to it. So if we have not had a discussion in class about it or in the forum, I will make that information available to you. But the premise is that people who live in a particular town, and by the way, there's been movies and then also radio programs. It's on audio, so it's in several places. It's a short story, and I know I read it in 9th grade in high school, so many of you probably did too. But it shows what happens when people go along with custom and tradition without questioning. Okay, for Kohlberg, I am going to share this video, and so I will put this in the notes here attached to this video. So go ahead and view this. Kohlberg didn't used to be in the original editions of this book back when it was just Thoreau. But when Krasseman was added as a co-author, this is when Kohlberg was added. And I think it's an important concept because what Kohlberg is saying is that we change what we feel is the right thing to do based over time. So as I started out in this lecture, I talked about how when we're young, we're told, don't take the cookie from the cookie jar. We're told right and wrong. But how we make moral decisions differs in how we age. And I'm going to ask you to ask yourself, when you were young and your mom or dad or somebody else asked you things, and was it really quick and easy to lie about it, even when it was obvious that it was a lie? And do you give it more pause now that you're older? So if your answer is yes, then that would show that it's important to look at moral development and that we don't make decisions in the same way based on our maturity. And part of that has to do with our intellectual development, and that they say our brains really aren't fully developed till we're 24, 25, which is why people under 25 cannot rent cars, which is why they've been able to keep the drinking age at 21. And so, because there are some cognitive differences. And so Kohlberg takes that into effect. There's some controversy as well because of the way he researched and picked his sample. And we are going to look at the other side of the coin. One of his researchers who worked with him, Carol Gilligan, we're going to look at her in chapter 2. But go ahead and check out this short video on Kohlberg and as it explains the stages. Okay, the next area that is covered in this textbook is morality and how it overlaps with law and with religion. So people sometimes confuse moral and the law. And so there can be things that are immoral but are not illegal. There can be things that could technically be legal, but they are immoral. And so it is important to see that they are not the same thing. So it overlaps, but we shouldn't confuse the two because they're not the same. So we can think of the law as kind of a codification of morality for a culture. So we do come together in people groups, and we determine that some things are right and some other things are wrong. And if we're really sure that we need it written in stone somewhere, we could make a law for it. But it is possible that some cultures can make laws that are immoral, such as apartheid. So law is not necessarily an attribute of morality. We hope that laws reflect morality, but they are not necessarily the same thing. Conversely, morality and religion, they also overlaps because, part of every religion I can think of has, as part of it, is the way to live a good life and be a good person. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily the same as morality. So for both of these sections, I do recommend that you go through and read through these on your own, because the authors bring up some good points. Is morality dependent upon religion? Can you be moral and non-religious? I know I, for one, hope that when I leave my house every day and I encounter people who are not religious, I hope they have a moral code. So because morality doesn't need to be based exclusively on religion, and why is that? So we can look at some reasons why morality doesn't have to be based on religion. So for one is it's difficult to prove a supernatural existence, and so God figures are usually, they're omnipotent, but they're also invisible. So the difficulty of proof. Also, as I've stated, there can be non-religious people who are moral. And so if morality requires religion, then there'd be no need for non-religious to be moral. And that wouldn't be good for our society. Difficulty of providing a rational foundation, again, that goes along with proving something that is unseen. And so there's another issue of trust and faith. Another reason is, but which religion? Because there are many. They don't all say exactly the same thing. Sure, people will point out that most of them have a form of golden rule: do unto others as you would have others do unto you, but not necessarily. And then, if we require it to be based on religion, and we have many religions, how do we resolve the conflict when there are religious differences? And so that's why we set morality as a part, as set apart from religion. But the other thing is, religion isn't somebody who has a religion isn't just because they That's their moral code. Um, it's something personal. It's about relationship. And so people don't become religious or stay with their particular religion because that's their prescribed moral theory, so to speak. It's something deeper and more personal. Okay, this brings us to why should we even bother? Why should humans be moral? So your text shares a few reasons, and we'll see if any of these resonate for you, with you, and motivate you to say, yes, I want to be a good person. All right. So the first one is enlightened self-interest. One can certainly argue on the basis of enlightened self-interest that it is, at the very least, generally better to be good rather than bad, and to create a world and society that is good rather than bad. So it's good in and of itself. Of course, we're throwing around the word good again, but it also can be in our self-interest to do good because the world works better. People will be nice to us. Um, if you lie, cheat, and steal, people aren't going to like you. They're not going to be your friend. What if you're in need and nobody's going to help you? And we're going to get to more under that scenario in chapter 2. So it's in your enlightened self-interest to do good and be part of what it takes to create a good society. So, and then we have the reasons we're good because it's the law or tradition. So written or unwritten law, we're good because we're supposed to. Some of us are rule followers. If there's a rule, we're going to follow it. And so, so that's part of it. And where do these come from anyway? So we can assume that people that came hundreds, if not thousands of years before us, they already experienced things that saw that some things cause harm and other things don't cause harm. And so they recognized that and wrote it down. So the people who went before us, they must have known something. And so there is some justification in following customary moral rules or law. And of course, it does avoid chaos because if we were all just doing whatever we wanted, life would be very chaotic. But we also have shared human need. People generally seem to need friendship. They need love, happiness, freedom, peace, creativity, stability in their lives. Not just for them, but their families, their households. And so it doesn't take much further examination to discover that in order to satisfy these needs, that people really should act and follow certain moral principles. And those principles are ones that encourage us to cooperate with one another and not harm each other. And operate in such a way that we are free from fear. Operate so that when we leave our house, we're not afraid we're going to lose our lives. I know some people live in places that's not the case, but that's a place that needs some more law and order of the moral kind. And so, why should human beings be moral? So it can be answered with this. It allows human beings to live their lives peacefully, happily, creatively, there we go, and meaningful as possible. So we're coming to the end of our chapter. So let's look at the significance and relevance of ethics. Well, for one, as far as relevance, it has become much more popular in the last decade to teach ethics or teach about ethics. It's not that we can teach you how to behave, but we can teach you about ethics and how to make ethical decisions, and then people are left to make those choices on their own. But we do see a popularity in the teaching of ethics, whether it be high schools, colleges, and corporations. I mean, who can forget in the TV show The Office when they were all brought together to have their ethical training? So, great clip. So, this should say Albert Einstein. The most important human endeavor is the striving for morality in our actions. Our inner balance and even our very existence depend on it. Only morality in our actions can give beauty and dignity to life. we've spent a great deal of this chapter talking about what morality isn't. We've talked about the things that are related to morality. We've said these things are like morality, but not necessarily the exact same thing. So going back to thinking back to that chart where we have the word ethics in the middle, and then all of these things coming apart from that. So your chapter ends with a working definition of morality. Morality deals basically with humans and how they relate to other beings, both human and non-human. It deals with how humans treat other beings so as to promote mutual welfare, growth, creativity, and meaning as they strive for what is good over what is bad and what is right over what is wrong. So now that we've finished chapter 1, let's take a look ahead just as a preview. How do we call the balls and strikes? How do we call what becomes ethical behavior versus not ethical behavior? And so it really depends on which ethical theory and which lens we're going to look through. So we have consequential ethics, which is about weighing pros and cons. We have non-consequential ethics, which means, well, yes, they care about the consequences, but a bigger concern is that they follow the rules. And then virtue ethics, which is being a good person of character, and we'll have several standards and measures that will look at that.